Hi, Paul. Thank you for the report back, the email, the photographs, and let's go through it now. So you are completed with installation and finished, and you're having some trouble. And I'm reading the email on the screen above this one. The whole thing fits fine between the stops. So you've received it, you've installed it. A little trouble with it, but you think you know what's wrong. Okay. The whole thing fits fine between the stops. Okay, so it was measured correctly and it was cut correctly. Now, I noticed that we ordered a 30-inch piece, and you asked that we send it out at 29-inch. First, and that would make sense, or it's within the range of making sense. You want to measure the distance between the stops and then deduct an eighth. So you should first confirm that 29 was correct to order it at, but also 29 was shipped. Not that Pemko makes errors, but it can happen. So we want to make sure that it's not too tight. So the opening between your stops should be about 29 and an eighth. But the fact that you get the door closed tells me that it works just fine in terms of the length. The problem is that when you open the door, often the gasket, actually the metal strip the gasket attaches to, gets stuck and doesn't snap all the way back up. That's the drop bar. So obviously the drop bar is getting hung up on something. You want to be sure that when the end plates are removed, that you have free operation, so that when the end plates are removed and nothing's holding it up, when you push the plunger in, it goes down, and when you release it, it snaps back up. That's number one. There might be some contact between the gasket running long and making contact with the inside face of the end caps. But the most common culprit for a drop bar not snapping back up is simply that the screws through the unit into the door are just too tight. Any crushing or crimping of that housing itself is going to exhibit this identical behavior. So loosen the screws up, then make sure that you don't have any problem there, or confirm that it's not the problem. Lastly, if you did trim it at all in the field or when it was cut during the manufacturing process, make sure that there are no metal burrs on the end of anything. Make sure that it slides up and down real nice using that test. Loosen all the screws, remove the end caps, make sure it snaps up and down real nice. At first you thought it might be the gasket, so you trimmed it a little bit more off one end, but that didn't help. Okay. I then noticed that the end plate on the latch side of the door was being pushed out about a 1/4 inch. I think the problem may be that the actual plunger screwed out too much, so that there's a little too much pressure when the gasket presses against the floor. Before I unscrew everything, wanted to check. Okay, so you noticed that the end plate of the lock side is pushed out, and that's evidenced in one of your photographs. You think that the plunger is sticking out too far. In another photograph, it's sticking out a significant amount. Not that that's wrong, but we'll discover that. Okay, so first of all, the length that the bolt is sticking out, that may not be a problem, but the bottom line is you want the projection of the bolt so that when the door closes, the lock side will be, well, per your picture, it'll be my elbow. The hinge side is going to drop. As soon as it makes contact with the sill, the rest of it will knife down. All you want is contact. No undue force. You don't want that plunger turned counterclockwise so far that the flat spring is really pushing on the unit itself. Because when you go to open the door, immediately you want there to be a relief of pressure of that flat spring, which pushes the drop bar down, so that the lock side immediately starts to come up so that you can lift the drop bar up. Any undue pressure, I can't say is going to flare your end plate out, but it may explain your earlier sentence that it doesn't reliably come up all the time. Well, it might be, but you might have so much undue pressure on the flat spring because the bolt is sticking out so far that it doesn't come up. So you're opening the door and you're looking at it like, why isn't that snapping back up into the housing? Well, there's still a lot of tension on that flat spring. So I would turn counterclockwise the bolt all the way in and then test it, and then counterclockwise a few revolutions just so that it hinge side drops, makes contact with the sill, just contact, stops, and then knifes down. You're going to have a little bit of compression over here to get that to knife down towards the lock side, but that's the proper operation. Once you've got contact on the lock side, don't turn it out anymore. It will have negative effect at that point. Now, your other photograph of the lock side end plate being pushed out. First of all, the amount of seal material, in your case, the EPDM insert, the synthetic rubber insert, is they ship it out far longer than it needs to be. So it not only must be trimmed, but here's the trouble. On the action of the automatic door bottom, when that thing drops, it doesn't drop. What it actually does is drop. It drops. So what you really need on the hinge side of the door is a little bit longer than you need on the lock side of the door, because when the unit goes into the closed position, it will come this way. My suspicion is that you simply have far too much neoprene still jammed in the lock side, and then when that drop bar doesn't drop, it drops on that angle. What you're doing is you're really just compressing it. It's being compressed, it has nowhere to go, and then it obviously, of course, must go somewhere, so it flared your end plate out. That's it. Drops, continues to drop and compresses over here, and then flares it out. I suspect that's what's occurred there. I would certainly, and if you, I don't know the undercut that you're dealing with, but based on the length of the plunger, you must have, okay, so you are certainly at the maximum drop of what you're contending with, because your next sentence goes on to say, I did have to install the door bottom a little below flush with the door because the gap was greater than the max allowable 3/4. Yeah, so you are certainly pushing that thing to its maximum in terms of drop. The other thing is, based on how long the bolt is sticking out, you want to make sure that the drop bar that the seal is connected to is not getting hung up because it's dropped so far. It's not being hung up for that reason. You might need to test it, remove the end plates and everything else I had said earlier, loosen the screws. Make sure you have proper operation. And then trim the EPDM insert. So I think the problem that you stated was the actuating plunger screwed out too much. We've discussed that. So that there's too much pressure when the gasket presses against the floor. Yes, again, you don't want that at all. Before I unscrew everything, including those darned small end plate screws, which are difficult to get back in indeed, you wanted to check to see if I would agree that you should screw the plunger in a little. And you state that if you screw it in too much, there will be an air gap at the latch side of the door. Yeah, because you're not making contact. It's okay to make contact. That's normal operation for the automatic door bottom. And that you did have to suck it down a little bit to make that total contact. So everything looks okay. Loosen the bolts, the screws through it, so make sure you're not crushing the housing a little bit. Make sure you have proper operation. But you do, I would certainly suggest that you remove the end plates. maybe only the lock side, because if you're making that proper contact, don't remove the hinge side end plate. You're going to want to trim, from what I can tell, you're certainly going to want to trim the lock side and synthetic rubber, because it looks like it's, from this photograph, still too long. And that should handle the problem. It should. Looking at all three of your photographs, I don't see anything else to mention except that you might want to pick up one more piece of hardware. You will notice that between the door rabbet and the edge of the door, there's some void there. So Pemko has a self-adhesive door jamb dust pad. It's really what it's called, and I will include a link down below this video response to that piece of hardware. It's nothing other than a piece of self-adhesive pile, really, that will attach to your jamb, so that when the door closes, the little pile will make contact with the style of the door, closing off the one open area that you really have in the door installation. Okay, but other than that, test those circumstances. Other than that, I don't see anything else wrong. Test those circumstances that I'd mentioned earlier, and please report back and let me know what you come up with. Thank you.